Hey, welcome to the BK Show podcast. This is episode number 34, and today I am joined by my friend Dave Charne. Dave is the co-founder and CEO of Fyrn, which is spelled F-Y-R-N. So if you're on your phone, check out fyrn.com. They make some amazing furniture. Dave is another person, just like Taylor Holiday and TC Poole, who I've had on here before, that I met in our Wednesday night poker group. Dave's got a cool story, or what I knew of it, and I wanted to know more, right? And so I got Dave on here to tell his story and tell us a little bit about Fyrn, and then towards the end, we talk a little bit about the company we invested in, Dibs, which officially launched today. Definitely go, if you're on an iPhone, go to the App Store and look up Dibs. And we briefly touch on NFTs. I'm going to have Dave back. I know Dave and Taylor Holiday and a bunch of people in our Wednesday night group are kind of geeking out on NFTs. So I think there's room for a deeper conversation there. But Dave's story is inspiring, so let's just jump right in. Please welcome to the show, Dave Charne. Dave Charne, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks, Ben. I'm happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
I'm actually really excited that you're here. I have a lot of deep questions that I didn't prepare you for, and I'm just kidding. You're honestly like one of the smartest people I've ever met. I'm just honored that you're on my show and that maybe I can like glean a little bit of wisdom from you, and that's the truth.
I mean, that's more than generous. I'm really happy to be here and talk to you today. And I'm excited to see where the conversation goes.
Well, once again, the Wednesday night poker group has produced a guest. That's where I met you. I don't think there's probably not a very good chance at all. And I'm going to say less than 1% chance I even know you or you even know me if that poker group doesn't exist. Would you say that's accurate?
I think that's probably true. You know, you never know when or how you're going to intersect with people. But I think one of the things that has been a really pleasant surprise has been this group of friends that I've made in this last year. And I think it was not only the power of sort of the internet being able to connect people and, you know, Twitter or whatever else it may be, but the pandemic sort of changed the way that we intersected with folks this year. And I think that this is one of the great gifts that I got out of the year. And I've been great to get to know you as well as a number of the other guys. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, there's quite a few in there I'm not sure I would have crossed paths with. Like I'm recording with Tyler after this. That'll come out next week. Jeff Vogel's on here. I'd love to get Roger on here as well. Taylor Holiday from episode 7 was on here. TC was on here just a couple weeks ago. And so very interesting how we've all crossed paths. And again, you seem like, how did you meet Taylor? You seem like you have a completely different background than quite a few people in that group.
Yeah. So, to my detriment, I probably stayed away from the internet in general, not the internet as a whole, but, Twitter was a new thing for me. I had a buddy who took a job there and was like, hey, you should get on here and check this out. And I think, for no good reason, I sort of just like was avoiding the entering sort of new technology and ways to interact with people. And it was both from having my head down and being busy with things, but also I think an aversion that has been detrimental to sort of my ability to intersect with folks that are outside my immediate circle. And so I jumped on and sadly, even to this moment, like, I'm much more of a lurker than a contributor in that area. And part of it's just sort of it all feels a little unnatural to me, at least initially. And I'm starting to get more comfortable. And I definitely want to participate in conversations more. I think what happened was I was on there and Taylor was somebody who, who I had been following and paying attention to in the D2C world. And he dropped hey, we got a Wednesday night poker game. Anybody interested? And I was like, yeah, I'm interested. I love poker. Let's see what's up. I hit him up in the DMs. And next thing I knew, I was on with all you guys, which seemed to be like, I thought initially a tight knit circle of folks who kind of knew each other from the D2C world. I've come to find out of those folks, while you had intersections at points in time, like wasn't like a group of friends that were tight. There are a few of those folks that Taylor knows well, of course, Aaron and and Ryan and others, but it was just like a really serendipitous moment. And then, we got on the first night. I had a really good time. We ended up talking about a lot of interesting stuff, and there was people from different parts of the country. And for me, it was just a really nice opportunity to get to know you guys. And I just made it a regular part of my Wednesdays. And Taylor over the last year has become a friend who I talk to quite a lot, and I've been doing other interesting things with. And so, yeah, I just feel like it was one of those lucky moments that just happened at the right time.
Wow, I didn't know you didn't know Taylor or know anybody, that it was just happenstance. I had no idea. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, you fit in the group, right? You push conversations, I think, in directions I don't have, right? Like, I'm from Wisconsin. I think that comes up a lot in the group of like, I'm not in that California world that you guys are in, but it's definitely different here, right? And so we've had conversations in there that I think, a lot of the nation needs to have. We've been able to have in that room, and being able to have diverse set of people. I don't know, it's been awesome to me. I had no idea you didn't know anybody in there, that this was all you followed Taylor because he's the DTC king of Twitter.
Yeah, it was just a chance moment. And, I think that's how a lot of the best stuff in life happens. You just sort of happen to be in the right place at the right time, and you either say yes or no. And if you say yes, sometimes great things happen. And I think especially as we went through leading up to the election, and I don't want to get too political or anything, but it was really nice to have dialogue with folks who were in, what would be considered very conservative places in the country and very liberal places in the country, and to get those perspectives and to understand what the issues were that were really driving, the way that people were thinking, because some of that stuff gets so, it gets characterized in such an extreme way. And I think that there's actually quite a lack of understanding that, that really comes from not having conversations with people who have nuanced points of view. So I just really appreciated some of those conversations as we were in the heat of a very challenging time. And, I think we continue to be, but it was at a peak when Trump was in office. And, and I found a lot of those chats. I found chats around guns and how they're used in homes. And, and we were going through the Black Lives Matter movement, and, and the perspectives of different folks from different parts of the country was very interesting. It's not a particularly diverse set of people, from a gendered or or cultural perspective, but I think that having just different perspectives from geography was very interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the first moments happened right near me in Minneapolis, right? So as we're talking about it, I'm literally on Snapchat on the maps, looking around, seeing buildings I know, being broken into and on fire, and sometimes things don't hit you when they're not super close to home, but I don't know. All of those things needed to be talked about. I'm glad I've been in this room. I don't know where I would have found that group of people had this not, again, just, serendipity. It's kind of like the story of my life, honestly. If I go through my story and talk you through every different moment that has propelled me to new heights, all of them were what seems like accidents, or like just an opportunity came by and I happened to say yes, or the universe shoved it in my face and was like, you're saying yes to this one. It wouldn't let me go on that. So yeah, I mean, you feel the same way in your life? It just happenstance comes around and you can ride the wave?
Yeah. I would say that particularly in the early, in the last, in the first 30 years of my life, it was a lot of an opportunity coming across my plate and saying yes, or deciding in the moment, let's do this. And, and I was always very open to sort of being willing to say yes without a lot of information. I think one of the more formative parts of my entire life was when I was in school. I went to University of Florida and I wanted to study abroad. I grew up sort of with a mentality of wanting to see the world. My father traveled and lived in many countries. So I heard a lot of stories growing up, and on my mom's side of the family, that was it was a big cultural value. She grew up in the Northeast in Rochester, New York, and her dad would load the car with the 4 or 5 kids, depending on sort of where they were in the cycle of age, and drive to Mexico, and drive, and just they would, they were not hesitant to adventure, and to sort of learn about other cultures and to embrace food, and and just sort of see the world through the eyes of other folks. You get a lot of perspective. So I'm getting off on a tangent, but I was in college and I wanted to study abroad, and I went to the office to figure out sort of where and how to do that. And I saw a poster on the wall, and it was for this thing called Semester at Sea. And I was like, what is that? That's a boat that you can be on and go around the world, and as a study abroad option. Next thing I knew, I was on that boat 3 months later, and the closest people in my entire life are from the first week that I stepped onto this boat, where I knew no one of the 600 kids from all over the world who got on there. I immediately had best friends. And those people are in my life 20 plus years later. And some of my other best friends are the people that they introduced me to. And it was just a moment where I was like, this looks interesting. I'm going to give it a go. And had I not seen that poster, I literally have no idea where I would be today, without those people.
So is it really a semester at sea? Like you're attending college while on a boat?
Yeah. So at the time, I did this in spring of '99. There's 600 kids, plus there's the folks, the staff, the teachers, and then there's also some senior passengers that are sort of like pseudo grandparents for you on the trip. You could be, the kids would sort of select an elder passenger, and that would be like a mentor or somebody that you could talk to. And it left from the Bahamas. It went to Cuba, Brazil, South Africa, Kenya, Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Hong Kong, and Japan. It was a 4-month experience. And so you'd spend about a week, 5 to 7 days in a country, on the entire transit on the way to that country. You'd be learning about the country. There'd be guest speakers who had entered on the port before, who are from the country that could be telling you about whatever was going on there politically and what the history was and, and what the culture was and what are the foods that you can expect. And so, then this boat would dock and 600 kids would pour off into a port. And, most of the time when you're in port, you didn't stay on the boat. You'd sort of just go off and have an experience, and sometimes that was a planned experience. If you were in Brazil, you might have had it set up that you were going to go down the Amazon River on a houseboat for 4 days. And if you were, in Cuba, you might have just sort of, we were the first Americans, students in Cuba in quite a long time. And so it was kind of an event, but that was just an amazing way to see the world, and to see the world sort of one country after another, was just an incredible experience. I was very fortunate to be able to do that. The program gives a lot of financial aid for folks who can't afford it. And so I was able to get and do that program. And, for me, it was transformative. It was just an extraordinary experience.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Like, that's something I want to do right now. Like, I would love to have different speakers from different areas of the world come on and teach me things while I get to experience a million different cultures. I've only experienced a couple. I've been to Thailand a few times. I went to China for, the world's largest trade expo, and then was in Hong Kong for like a day. And that I was hooked from the very first time I ever left the country. I was hooked. I need to see the rest of the world. I need to experience other cultures. It gave me so much more perspective than I got, in this small little town in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think that, there's a lot of parts of the world where this is a priority, and some people don't have that opportunity or the privilege to be able to be mobile and to travel. But in a lot of parts of the world, while you're out traveling, and, I did this again after I graduated. I took almost a year and traveled the world, on my own. And, and you meet so many folks who are sort of in their gap year before they go to university, or after they go to university before they work. And, it's just part of it's part of gaining insights around how other people are living and what's happening. And, that can be a thing where you throw on your backpack and you just party for months. It can also be a thing where you really learn a lot about the way that different people are living and experiencing life. And that, I think, when you bring that back to where you live, it allows you to have empathy for other people. It allows you to think about things from different perspectives. And to me, like, if there was one thing that you could gift to folks in order to create bridges and to create paths to understanding, and to, and it would be that. It would be like an opportunity to get outside of whatever your personal experience is, and see how other people are living and experiencing things. I mean, I think that's what the internet's done in a lot of ways, in a virtual manner, and in an opportunity to sort of intersect with people. But there's no, in my mind, replacement for having your feet on the ground and getting your hands dirty, and, and tasting street food in a place, and, and being invited into someone's home who barely knows you, and opens up their hospitality and their, and their life to share with you, and vice versa. Like, I think that's where you really build understanding.
So let's riff on that, man. How do you make that happen? Honestly, if your parents weren't travelers, my parents weren't, right? My dad, I think he just flew on his first plane a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah.
We didn't go anywhere either. We took the minivan to Texas and to Colorado a few times, right? That was our family vacation that I think my dad's still paying off in debt, right? We didn't have much. And so the moment I was, I bought this course and there was a retreat in Thailand, that opened my eyes to like, okay, this sounds amazing. I want to go somewhere else. I had never, ever even thought of going anywhere else in the world, ever. And so unless your parents do it, how do you expose people to that? How do you even get that idea in their head? Because I agree with you. It was life-changing for me to leave this country and experience another culture and eat in someone's home, and walk the street food carts in Thailand. It's incredible, right? I wish that for anyone as well as you do. So how do we make that happen? How do you even expose people to that who maybe don't have access?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's a great question, and I certainly don't have the answer. What I will say is that in general, there's sort of basic needs that have to be met before you can start thinking about how do I get my passport stamped and go around the world. And it's complicated, but we're not always providing some of those basic needs for folks, or a lot of folks are sort of not in a position to be able to even explore that idea. But I think there's more to it. I think there's a lot of people who are in a position to be able to explore that and don't. It's not even something that sort of registers as a path, like you said. Like if you don't see examples of something in front of you, it's sometimes hard to imagine it or to recognize how to take that first step. And so, in my mind, like if there's a fundamental belief that is something that can do good for us as if we're talking about in the United States, it's an unbelievable amount of people don't have a passport, right? It's just never on the radar. And so, I'd love to see that propagated through education, that there's opportunities at young ages to recognize that that's an option. I think the internet has made that type of thing more accessible and more visible to people, that this can be done, and you are seeing that have an impact. But overall, I think it's just for the people who have had that experience to then go out and sort of be evangelists and think about where they might be able to instill those values in their kids and talk to the classrooms. Like I have people in my life, like my uncle, who's an incredibly he's an educator. There's a lot of educators in my family, and he's an educator who's taken children around the world for 25 years. He brought them to Morocco. He brought them to Belize. He brought them to Costa Rica. Like he made that part of his mission to open those doors and those pathways for kids. And then I know a lot of those kids have gone off and said like that was one of the more transformative experiences they've had. And then they've sort of shared that experience with others. So, I think a lot of it, like anything, is just sort of showing that that's an option, trying to promote it if you believe in it. Every time I've had an opportunity to talk to a cousin or a friend who's at a point where they might be able to take a study abroad program or do semester at sea, if I can throw a few bucks their way to help support that idea, or if I can sort of open the path towards talking about why it was so important to me, I go out of my way to do that because I think it is meaningful. Systemically, how you change it, I think that's a good question. I think that's a thing that we should think about how to address. I don't know if that's at a government level or an education level or just at an individual level, but I think it would be worthwhile.
And what if it was like mandatory that you take a year abroad, right? Like, I think that would be incredible. Or, I mean, not across the board, but I think that certain universities could pull that off. Or what's going to become of universities in the future when we realize, they're not what they used to be, and learning's online. And I think there's a real opportunity to do almost a digital nomad college experience.
Yeah, I think international is super important. I also think like it would be really rad if there was if we brought back the Civil Corps here in the United States, where like there was an opportunity to gather and for folks who wanted it or who enrolled in it, like there was a time where you'd work on the infrastructure, in this country, and people from all over the country came together and we're working on sort of building the roads, the bridges, the tunnels of America, and that was a program that was subsidized by the government. It created jobs for people, and it brought people together and that intersected. And I think even that kind of stuff is a form of traveling, right? You can travel without going anywhere, in some ways. I think, there's different levels of this, and programs in my mind that sort of bring people together, and put them in a situation where you have to intersect is a positive. And I think you see this in cities, right? Like it's no coincidence that in New York City, where you have density, where you have people who live in tight spaces, that in my mind, New York gets an attitude of like, I think of Coming to America, it's like, get out of the way, asshole, and it's like the guy in the street, but like, it's like people have an intention in New York, but if you need help from a stranger, and in my mind, I think you're a better chance of getting it in a place like New York, where people sort of live in a densely packed environment and actually, look out for each other, like in a different way than when you're separated and there's a lot of distance between folks and it's about putting up a fence and you don't have to really intersect that much. In my mind, I think there's value in intersecting and having that density. And I see it when I go to New York. Like it's one of the few cities where I really feel like there's lots of cultural crossover, and lots of different places. And it doesn't mean that there's not separation, the same way there is anywhere, but like in San Francisco, it's diverse and interesting place, but not really. Like, it's fairly segregated, to be honest. And I think that, I don't know, I'm off on a tangent, but I think that it's really great to go to a place where people are in many ways forced to have respect and understanding for each other, who understand that those circumstances that we're all living in impact each other in a way that matters. If you have neighbors at every side of you, you have to be thinking about whether you're making too much noise and whether you're disturbing them, and how to be thoughtful for those folks. And I think that translates to how you treat people in the world.
Yeah, and you might also see how people are treated differently in this world too when you're surrounded by that, right? Definitely, I'm in small town Wisconsin. You don't get too much cultural diversity in this town, if I'm being honest. And so I get your point there. We could go off on a million tangents. I want to get your brain like spinning on some of the things that we're into now, probably towards the end of this, with dibs and nifties. And I do want to hear that prison basketball story I heard last week. I think that'd be cool. But like, I don't know how we got here, right? So again, I met you, about a year ago now, maybe a little less, playing poker. And I knew you were, a founder of what I thought was Fyrn. It's Fyrn, Fyrn.com. But every time you talk, the room shuts up and listens, and it's for a reason. You have a lot of experience, and I think you've done a lot of cool things. So I'm genuinely curious how we got here, right? So after, taking that C semester, as you're calling it, how did we get here? Walk me from that C semester until we're here today, because I know you've done some cool stuff in between.
Yeah. So, when I was graduating school, I had made the decision that I wasn't going to take a job after college. I was going to travel again. I wanted to get out and see the world some more. I was very interested in sort of going back and seeing some of the places that my heritage originated from, some of my ancestry. And I remember going to lunch with my dad at a Thai restaurant that was around the corner from our place, and I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. And I'm not sure that I'm going to have a job lined up. Like, I don't think that's super important to me at the moment. And he, having spent many, many years of his life living in India and Nepal and Morocco, I thought would be like super supportive. And it was interesting. He was like, I totally support seeing the world, but I think that you should take advantage of the fact that you've done very well in school, and that there might be opportunities for you to secure a good job. That's momentum that you should take advantage of. And I was like, okay, that's not terrible advice. Obviously, I should at least explore what those opportunities would be. And to be honest, I think part of this was I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I entered school pre-med. I sort of decided that was not something that I really, really was passionate about, and it was too much schooling and too difficult and too much volunteering to really to go down that path. And then it was computer science. And then I was like, you know what? If I'm being honest, like, I feel like I wasted a good portion of my college experience from an education standpoint. Because what I did was think, what can I do where I can sort of get all A's and not study that hard or work that hard? And, and it's such a lame perspective now when I look back on it, but it was sort of business. Like, I just kind of intuitively understood finance and economics and business. And so that's the path I went. And I was able to do that. I was able to like not study that much and not learn that much and get very good grades, which now looking back, I feel silly about, right? I feel like I really wasted the opportunity to learn deeply about things that would have been much more instructive in my life. And so anyways, I relied on that, and I ended up taking a couple of interviews at a company called Arthur Andersen. Was one of the only companies I interviewed with. I went for a corporate finance role that I had ended up being at a mixer at my favorite bar at University of Florida, and I ended up talking to the recruiter. She was recruiting for jobs down in Miami, which was close to where I was living, and I was like, I don't have any interest in staying there. I'd like to be in New York. I'd like to be in San Francisco. And she said, well, I have no idea if that's going to be available, but you should come through the interview process. And I did. And I got a job offer in San Francisco. I got an interview in San Francisco for a corporate finance role. So I flew out to San Francisco. I had some family here. That uncle that I referenced lived here. I stayed with them. I show up at the interview, and the morning of, they say, we'd like you to interview for corporate restructuring and corporate finance. I have no idea what corporate restructuring was. Literally no clue. So I walk up into the lobby and I sit down, and next to me is Joe Montana. And Joe Montana was my like childhood hero, my favorite guy, growing up. Was born in the Bay Area. I was here till I was 6. I was like, as a sports guy, that was my guy. And I looked over and his hands were enormous. I was like, oh my God, this guy's hands are huge. So I had to introduce myself, and I was like, oh, this is a good omen. I said hello. He was like, oh, I got to go. I have an appointment. I think he was getting some tax consulting or something. And so I went into this series of interviews, and my entire stance was basically, I'm going to be really straight up that in order to be able to do this job and feel like I'm fully committed to it, like I want to be able to fulfill this dream to go see the world a bit more. And I was really open about that in the interview process. And I went through the interviews and I talked to these folks about what these two options were, corporate finance or corporate numbers around, that's a simplification, but there wasn't going to be a lot of sort of traveling and going out and spending time sitting in these companies that we were going to be working with. Corporate restructuring, it turned out, was going to be about sort of these turnarounds of struggling businesses, it was just how it was described to me. And so when I got done with a couple of days of interviews, I got a call from her and they said, role to offer you, you actually have an option to be in either role, which would be more interesting. And I said, well, I'm much more interested in even to travel to these cities and to work hands-on at these companies. That sounds more interesting to me. I'd love to pursue the corporate restructuring role, but I was very open about the fact that I don't really want to start for 6 to 9 months, if possible. Is that something that would be on the table? I thought for sure they would say no. And they said, yeah, that's fine. We're happy to have you start with the class that comes out next. Let's put a date on the calendar. We just like to peg that. So I pegged a date 9 months out. And I had a 9-month runway to go travel and see the world. And so I did. I went out and so I met my family, my grandmother's family in Italy, and I went to North Africa, Morocco, where my dad and my uncle had lived for a period of time and spent a lot of time. I went to Egypt. We continued on to Asia, and I met up with a handful of friends, and that was a really formative experience. 7 months in, I got a call. It was the .com bust was happening, and they were, can you be back sooner? We'd love for you to start sooner because we have a demand for folks, and there's sort of crisis is happening. All throughout the time that I was traveling, people are getting phone calls. You don't have a job. You don't have a job. You don't have a job, because the economy was falling apart. I was getting a call that was saying, can you be here earlier? I just got lucky. I chose a path that was lucky, right? Had I gone corporate finance, I had no job when I came back, but I went restructuring. And instead of not having a job to look forward to, it was, can you get here sooner? So I got there, I started this work, and 6 months in, Enron happened to Arthur Andersen, and the entire 80,000 person company of Arthur Andersen collapsed. It was a sort of monumental moment, if you remember it. There was accounting fraud at Enron, and it took down this, one of the largest consultancies on the planet. I remember thinking about looking at I think it was the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, and Arthur Andersen printed the name of every single person, and it was like 6 pages at 6-point font of these people who are losing their jobs because of this accounting fraud that happened at Enron, and it was taking down the whole company. Another completely chance moment, this boutique restructuring firm out of New York called Alvarez & Marsal, which at the time had about 20 people, was doing the restructuring of Arthur Andersen. It wasn't a restructuring, it was a liquidation. They came in and they looked at the three of the cities that were in the corporate restructuring practice at Arthur Andersen, and they bought half of each one of those groups. And that's what took them from 20 to 50 people. I think it was Atlanta, Chicago, and San Francisco. And it wasn't my whole group that got taken. There was about 12 people. About half of us were brought forward. The irony here was, like, I was a kid with 6 months experience, no MBA. Most of the people I was working with had substantially more experience than I did, but they took me. I was lucky to be one of those 6. I guess, there's a guy named Bill Casturis who believed in me and gave me that opportunity. So I ended up fortunate to be included in this group of folks who got acquired. I entered this company. I have very little experience on a relative basis to the other folks that are there. And pretty quickly, I work on a job that's in Washington, D.C. And every week for 3 years, I'm traveling out to Washington, D.C., and I'm spending 2, 3, 4 weeks sort of living in a hotel. On weekends, I'm traveling to wherever I want, because the flight across the country means I can go wherever I want. If I want to go, further on to, to the UK for the weekend, or if I want to stay in Washington, I can. And so I had a real sort of good time, for a handful of years in that situation. I ended up dating a woman there for a while that that came and moved back to San Francisco with me. But pretty quickly, I realized that everyone in this company was largely generalists focused on crisis management, liquidity management, working through these situations where companies were, in a lot of instances, failing. And I worked with a woman who became my mentor, this woman, Kay Hong, who, she and I worked on a retail apparel job. And we worked on a couple in a row, and ultimately sort of ended up focusing on this vertical of retail apparel, which was a way to kind of differentiate with an industry focus in the world of retail. And that became an opportunity to sort of gain some expertise that went beyond the crisis management stuff. And and so I did a number of jobs. We worked with Eddie Bauer, a company I can't name, out of Portland, Maine. We worked with Harry and David, which was a food gifting retailer in Southern Oregon. And then Talbot's was sort of the last place that I was working for about 3 years. They were deeply struggling, and were acquired by a company called Sycamore, a private equity company. It was a great experience working with a really wonderful management team over that period of time. That's where I sat in the CFO and COO chairs, and we had an incredible turnaround of that business. In a short while, it went from losing $50 million of EBITDA to making over $100 million of EBITDA by the time that we left. And I've stayed very close to a lot of those folks. But around that time, I was getting ready to have a family, to start a life with my wife, Clea, to start having children. And we had sort of always talked about when we have a family, I don't want to be on the road as much as I had been, and sort of in a position where I would be away. And so, I had just recently been promoted to managing director, and I had to call, Bill Kostouris, who gave me that opportunity initially, and say, "Hey, Bill, it's been a great run, but I think I'm going to step aside and go a different direction in my life here." And so I took a lot of time off in that first year of my daughter's life, Fiona. And during that time, I met my partner now, my business partner now at Fyrn, Ross, which is a whole nother story, which I can dive into if you want, but I feel like I just ran on quite a bit.
Yeah, I got to jump in and ask some questions for sure. Yeah. What's it like going through Enron, like your company getting destroyed via some other company? Like, what was that like?
I was so naive at that time and knew so little about anything, but generally about, what was happening was almost surreal. It was like, I wasn't vested enough in my career at that point and making deliberate enough decisions to really understand what was happening. I was just sort of along for the ride. But I remember wild things happening. You were sort of going through this moment, and it was really sad because a lot of people were losing their jobs, and you knew that the gravity of the situation was intense, and it was also being reported on intensely. And so, like each day and each week was sort of like coming in, and what was going to happen next was there was a lot of focus happening on that moment, and being in the middle of it was strange. To be honest, like I'm trying to remember a lot of what it felt like, but it just sort of felt like the earth was moving a little bit underneath you, and you didn't know how things were going to settle, I guess is the best way I can put it.
And how is a consulting firm connected to it? Draw that line for me, because Enron, weren't they like energy and utilities, something like that?
Yeah. So Arthur Andersen was one of the big five, what back in the day was a big five accounting firm, and so they were the auditors for Enron. And, my area of Arthur Andersen was a relatively tiny practice in the grand scheme of things, that did things that were very different than the auditors are doing. But that fraud brought down the entire company and all sort of segments of the company along with it. And, and so we, while we had nothing to do with a large portion of the company, and that was that was what was being reported on, I would say most broadly, was just sort of how many people were being impacted by what ultimately was one audit team's mistake, which was, or not a mistake, was, the fraud that they had been committed in both and covering up at that time. And so, that was the demise of that company.
Yeah, that was my next question. Was it a mistake or were they in on it?
No, I think it was a fraudulent set of events that that I don't remember all the details at this point, but there was a lot of reporting around the sort of covering up of the fraud and the shredding of documents, and and I may be mischaracterizing some of this, but my recollection is that there was some fraudulent events that were then tried to be covered up in some way, and that led to the downfall.
Mm. And so you zoom through the other company, which is over a decade, according to your LinkedIn. So what is that? Are you just putting out fires at what is corporate restructuring, and what are you actually doing at these companies? And then how does that lead to you being COO and CFO of some big name companies that, you don't list publicly, but I know some of the names. They're big, right? And so help me understand that process there.
Yeah. So, I think that, corporate restructuring can mean a lot of things. It starts, and sort of fundamental to that practice was around the financial and operational restructuring. So that could be a balance sheet restructuring of a company that has too much debt and has been struggling for some time, and finds themselves in a challenging situation, whether it be for external circumstances, like, the pandemic is a very good example. If you have lots of physical retail and you weren't nimble enough to move a lot of your demand and sales into the online channel, then you're very likely one of the companies that is in a position right now that's facing bankruptcy, or that is very challenged, right? Because you have debt coming due, or you're unable to sort of salvage your business. And so, fundamentally, the folks who are running a business day to day, sometimes they're positioned and understand how to operate in a situation like that. But a lot of times, that's not their core competency. And it's not necessarily their core competency to be negotiating with the legal and, with the lenders in a distressed situation, and with the folks who, if they get pushed into bankruptcy, that's a process that requires a sort of level of expertise that they're not acquainted with. So in that process, there are sort of two sides to what can happen. One is the entity doesn't survive, and that becomes a liquidation of that business and a wind down. I went through one of those shortly after Enron. It was actually, an entity that was an extension of Pacific Gas and Electric, that had a demise, and I went through a wind down process, and I learned a lot about what happens in a liquidation and restructuring and the wind down of a company. And what I really realized through that process was that's not that interesting to me. I don't enjoy that process. However, the other side of the coin is when you're able to have a successful turnaround of a business that is struggling. And so, that often means that some aspect of the company may not go on, or that you do need to make significant changes to the business. But if the overall business can survive and thrive, and sort of that can happen through a bankruptcy process or outside of one, it can be, quite a rewarding experience. The primary benefit of which is saving a lot of jobs. So, for example, Harry and David is one of the largest employers in Southern Oregon. There's very few people who have sort of lived in or around the town of Medford who don't have a family member who's worked there. It's an interesting, business that started with fruit gifting through the mail. They own a huge amount of orchards there. The Comey's pear, if you're familiar with that, which is a delicious pear, is most of them are grown there in the valley. And then they also manufacture quite a lot of candy and things like that. You've probably had Moose Munch, which is popcorn dipped in caramel and chocolate. And so they have a broad assortment of gifting items, and they got themselves into quite a bit of trouble. 80% of their entire business happens right around the Christmas holiday, and so if you don't properly understand your demand curve and manage the discounts around that, or if you're making choices that ultimately lead to a bad season, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And that business had been, was mismanaged over a period of time, and we were able to sort of come into the business at a moment of distress and what looks like a likely end to a legacy business that had been around for 80 plus years. And the woman that I mentioned, who was a mentor at one point, became the CEO, the interim CEO. I was working as the treasurer, and we went through a very distressed process, but ultimately were able to turn that business around over the course of 11 months. We had a vast improvement in the top and bottom line. We got back on track in a way that gave the opportunity for the business to go on and survive. And, that happens in conjunction with the existing management team. There's a team on our side that was at that point was 5 people, all of which had critical roles in the success of that business. And you're working with other constituents in the legal and the banking side to make it happen. But the part that I loved about that work, and that was probably one of the most stressful experiences of my life, because in the back of my head, I was thinking, if we're not successful in this process, there's a lot of folks who aren't going to have a job, and there's not a lot of alternative job opportunities in that area. And so it felt like the most pressure I've ever experienced from a career perspective. But it was also one of the sort of sweetest successes. And in a lot of ways, I think it was, I don't know if you've been through a thing like this, Ben, but like there was a lot of doubt in that moment about whether I was qualified or the right person to be in that role, or whether we were going to be successful, even if I was. And, I think when those types of moments happen, you build foundation that you can then grow from. And it was both like one of the most challenging career moments and one of the most fulfilling. And I felt like it gave me a level of confidence that I could then sort of build on top of. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that experience was sort of fundamental in some of the next steps that happened for me.
Yeah. Just a brief bit of clarity for myself. Like, who's calling that in? When a big company, such as some that you have named here, goes into that distressed state, and they're filing bankruptcy, or they might have to shut down. Is it their lawyers who are helping them get through this process that calls a company like you worked for in, or like who calls you in to like hopefully come try to rescue the situation? Yeah.
So it can happen in a number of different ways. It depends on who the owners of the company are, who's sitting on the board, whether or not they're forced into bankruptcy or doing that on a voluntary basis, which both paths are possible. So there's a lot of different variables in which, can determine sort of who the advisors or interim management of that company will be ultimately, right? And so the stakeholders, whoever it is that sits in a position of being the stakeholders, will be faced with a set of decisions, and often will bring in an outside advisor who specializes in that particular moment, right? And it doesn't always happen that you would take an interim management seat. You might work with the existing team in order to go through that process. That's sort of a case by case basis, and just depends on sort of how the situation evolves. But in a lot of cases, that ends up being a board decision to go ahead and get prepared for what could eventually become a bankruptcy process, or sort of give them the best chance to avoid one. And what I would say is that, the success in those situations, sometimes the circumstances are so dire or so challenging that you may not be able to navigate a successful path. But one of the things that I think I learned as we went through a number of these instances is that you really need to sort of figure out the answers in a lot of cases on sort of where and how to turn a business around that's failing. Because, obviously I don't know the most about Harry and David when I walk through the door. I might have a lot of experience understanding multi-channel retail businesses and have seen the movie before in certain instances, but you need to be able to sort of understand how to find the folks who have history with the company, who understand, where there might be opportunities that have been overlooked or been mismanaged by a team that, that is not necessarily, listening to some of their leadership in different areas. And then you need to be able to connect some dots. And a lot of it just comes down to sort of communication and execution. And I know that's an oversimplification, but I think having an understanding that there are repeated mistakes that you see in a lot of businesses that fail, and those patterns, create opportunities to sort of solve them and figure out how to get back on track. We started to see a pattern of businesses that believed that their customer base was aging too quickly and therefore the business was going to disappear. You saw that with Talbot's. The prior management team effectively fired their customer. They were catering to an affluent older woman, and they decided that they wanted to sell clothes to her daughter. And so they changed the entire style of every storefront. They changed the aesthetics of the catalogs. They ignored some of the things that had worked historically. And what do you know? The business tanked in a way that was incredibly, detrimental. And ultimately, within that business, there were many folks who knew that these were mistakes and who knew that that path would not work. What we had to do when we came in and sort of worked with that business was get back to the core things, the fundamental things that the customer wanted. The customer never went away. She just started purchasing a lot less. She wasn't as interested in what the assortment was. She wasn't feeling like the business was talking to her. And sort of figuring out how to get back in touch with that is a big part of getting back on track. And then there's all the sort of operational and financial pieces that are just making smart and good decisions. Do you have competitive sourcing arrangements where you can lower your cost basis? Is your assortment too broad, or and do you have a clear point of view for what the end use for the customer is going to be? Are you creating a layer of within merchandising, like is there way too much seasonal apparel versus the evergreen stuff that's going to live forever and not need to be discounted? People were addicted to discounts and markdowns for a while. How do you sort of wean the customer off of that in a thoughtful way? And instead of discounting broadly like peanut butter across everything, you're sort of surgical and discounting a category. These are, I'm just giving you examples, but when you add all that stuff up, the sum of the parts, in combination with leadership, and there was a great management team that was brought in who was behind the resurgence of that business, management that shows the team a path towards success and sets reasonable targets that are achievable, not wildly unachievable things that makes everyone morale drop when you can't get there. There's great things that can happen in the same business 3 years after it was, or 1 year after it was a complete disaster, before those changes were made. So I hope that provides some context and a little bit of, a little bit of understanding of a very complex sort of set of circumstances.
So I know I've heard you talk before, Dave, that it wasn't all turnarounds, right? Like you did some things that weren't so depressing, or potentially depressing. So like you and Taylor decided to hire somebody to go investigate people. I don't even know what you're doing with that. But you guys shared it in our poker group. So I've got like notes upon notes here of all the people trying to vie for that job who investigated you. And one of them talks about Lululemon. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I assume that's more on the growth side versus like coming into rescue side.
Yeah. And, I would say that I was very fortunate, and it's partially the team I worked with, and it's partially, that we were in situations where we were able to be successful. But, what I loved about the work that I did at many of these companies was that they were positive outcomes, and that, doing operational turnaround work where you really get to see a business go from struggling to being successful is incredibly rewarding. And I was fortunate to participate in a number of those, as opposed to the first time I ever had a gig where it was about a wind down and a liquidation and a wind down. And so, if I'm coming off as if those are depressing, I'd like to recharacterize that a bit. And, but I understand where you're coming from. The Lululemon stuff was awesome. It was, it was not a incredibly long situation, but they were, this unbelievably successful business out of the gate. They wanted to go from 50 stores in Canada to 200 in the United States, and we're looking at how to expand and grow that business. I was part of a small team that came in and sort of worked with the company worked with the company to figure out what was the best path to that. And this was pre-IPO. I got it was really where I sort of got a chance to learn quite a lot about, four-wall store economics and to think through, real estate decisions. It was one of the first times I was sort of, thinking hard about decision-making around where you open stores and how you open those stores. Lululemon's economics on store payback is like nothing you've ever seen. These folks were 6 months from the time the store opened, it was cash flow positive, which is extraordinary. And their sales per square foot were off the charts. It turns out that $80 to $100 yoga pants are quite profitable. And we've seen that, in the years following, just extraordinary growth and execution. What I loved most about Lululemon was just how their early marketing was so creative. And, they did things, they ran promotions like the first 200 people to show up naked will get clothing. And so you can imagine the press around a line of naked people standing outside a Lululemon store, getting free clothing. It was just that kind of cult appeal, and a belief in a brand that represented a sort of cleaner, better life, was just fire. The way that they engaged their community in building ambassadors through folks who already had existing followings. If you were leading a yoga studio or, in today's world, if you were a SoulCycle instructor, like being a Lululemon ambassador, they put pictures of those people up in store and they built through those communities. I just think that they were, you see examples of companies that execute strategies incredibly well, learning a lot from them and being a part of putting together the plans for how they would expand, into the United States and capitalize that growth, and make real estate choices was a great learning opportunity for me.
How does, helping distressed companies, right? And then moving on to, helping other companies as well, such as Lululemon. How does that transition into what you're doing now at Fyrn? Like, obviously you stepped away, you wanted to have a family, you spent some time with your daughter, and you briefly touched on meeting the co-founder and I think the guy who developed this technology. But how does that transition to that? Like, that's all corporate world. How do you decide, I want to take a stab at this entrepreneurship thing?
Yeah. So I think, as we were talking about earlier, some things in life are chance, some are deliberate. This was a combination of both in my mind. I knew that I was ready for a change. I had, in going through a lot of the work that I had done, I had a real desire to do something that, I was excited about and that would feel grounded in, I don't want to diminish it because widgets is the wrong word, but something that a product that I believed in and that I thought had more to it than just how many of these can you sell, right? And I was in that period where I was I was hanging around the mission quite a lot. My wife went to CCA for her MFA. And so I knew a lot of artists from that program. And I ran into my friend Mick, and he had his studio nearby. And I said, Mick, what's up, man? I haven't seen you in a while. Like, what are you working on? Let me come by and check it out. And he brought me to his studio, and it was actually his future brother-in-law that is Ross, the co-founder of Fyrn, and my partner, had been working on this system of furniture. And he had, the prototypes for chairs that were the set of chairs and stools that immediately I was just sort of blown away by the look of them. I always had a thing for chairs in particular. I just think they're fascinating, in lots of ways. And I was like, hey, I'd really like to meet Ross. He said Ross was at this place where he had developed this system, but was really stuck because he had to figure out how to sort of build that into a business, and was just short on, on bandwidth, resources. How do we do that? And so when I met Ross, we met at the workshop, and we took a walk and had a coffee and talked for the first time. And what I learned very quickly was that, Ross had this background. He was a fourth generation woodworker and builder who came from a place and a time where, you knew who was making the furniture. There was a story behind every piece. His grandfather later in life went blind, but if he touched any piece of furniture in the house, he could tell you every detail of it. And, it's one of the things that stuck with me. But Ross had a vision for, how do we build a company that and build a product that could never be thrown away, basically, that really, was about quality, but could be built in a scalable manner and done here. And he took his expertise. He's not formally an engineer. He didn't go to school for any of those things. He's just one of these folks who he's mechanically minded. His grandfather was the lead of manufacturing and production for one of the oldest chair companies in the country, the Hitchcock Chair Company. So he had learned a lot about these types of things through his past experience. And he applied all that to building this system that in many ways takes the genius of parts and pieces, which has efficiencies in many areas of the business, and put the sort of quality and craftsmanship into this. And then because we're in San Francisco, where things are expensive and space is limited, there was just a lot of ingenuity that had to go into building a scalable production process. So not only are the connecting parts patented, but Ross has designed, and either through modifying off the shelf machinery or building machinery from scratch, there's 25 plus machines that are involved in the production of the furniture that are unique to our production process and allow these things to happen in smaller spaces. When I heard the story and I went and I looked at what was going on there and, what he had been working on, I was just really impassioned by the idea that, you could sort of do U.S. manufacturing in a way that could change the way people sort of purchase and go through the furniture experience. And you could build products that have stories behind them that are right here. That's not a novel concept. Everybody's excited about building products that have stories, but and the more I talked to Ross, the more it was about how do we create a ecosystem that will provide for these things to sort of never be thrown away. And that comes through not only the ingenuity of the system, but building programs such as an exchange where the used furniture is always going to be available for resale and can easily be refurbished if we do it, or a customer who owns a set of furniture in, let's say, San Antonio can list on the exchange to sell to someone in their community. And if you want Fyrn product that's been used and more accessible, through a used and rather than new, you can go to the exchange and know that's where the pieces will be. And that will sort of retain the story of where that piece has been. It was owned by a musician or an artist, or just a family has had it in their life for the last 12 years. And then, to make that sort of circle complete, we're also, we'll add a layer where we'll be willing to buy the furniture back from customers in the future. It's of a quality and it's designed in a way that, we'll stand behind that product for its lifetime. And then we'll put it into use again and give it a second life or a third life. And that concept, when I had spent so much time inside companies where it was all about how do we take cost out of this product. And, we watched wash cycles on sweaters go from 30 to 12, where then a customer is going to need to replace it. You knew when you put a piece of furniture together, assembled a piece of IKEA furniture, you could feel that it was going to break while you're doing it. And I think IKEA is a brilliant company, and I love the systems that they have. I have so many positive things to say about them, particularly the direction that they're now going. But that's a fact. As I watched more plastic go into every single thing that I bought, you get it and you just knew when you took it out of the box, this is not well made. This is not thinking about materials that will last. I got tired of that, and I was inspired by this person who was like, we can do better. This is a thing that can be accessible to more and more people as we scale the manufacturing and bring the costs down. And we can build something that sets an example for how you can manufacture products that aren't about planned obsolescence and that are designed to last and that will be reused and that will carry a story. And it was just one of those moments where the light bulb went off for me. And I was like, I want to be a part of building this with this person. And I think that I have a skill set that will help. And we spent about 6 months dating before we got married. And then we launched that business publicly in late 2016. And we've been building from there.
So what is it? Is it all the things congruently that draw you in, or is it like this Fyrn exchange, or excuse me, Fyrn? I'm gonna screw this up a few times, I think, on this podcast. The exchange side of it is that something that was around from the beginning? Did that spawn out of your head? Is that what intrigued you? Or like you're also a member, or so I've read, of the Good Future Design Alliance, which is about, like helping have less waste in this industry. And so like, is it all parts summed up that drew you in here, or is there one of them that really lit you up inside?
Yeah, for me, I think that there was a lot of aspects that were attractive. I really was drawn to the integrity and the quality of person that I think Ross is, and then his vision for what this could be was inspiring. But I think that being rooted in my neighborhood, in a place where these things were being built, a 5-minute bicycle ride away, that when you picked up one of these pieces of furniture, the quality of it was. It was just apparent in a way that sort of, I don't know, it connected something, it fired something off in me that it was like, wow, I would love to be a part of building this and with Ross. And I think that the driving force for me when I was trying to make decisions, because I had some other opportunities that probably would have been way more lucrative and a lot less work, and frankly, like would have leveraged my experience in ways that just would have been an easier path. I thought about my kids and I thought about like, hey, I want to share with them something that like I'm going to be proud of building and can point to having an impact in the world that might be meaningful. And, we're still selling furniture, and I don't want to overstate, the impact of selling a furniture or something for your home. But I think that creating a company that thinks hard from the very beginning of conceiving how the product is designed to be something that can be circular and create an ecosystem we're seeing more of that happening, but we're seeing a lot of it happening in a way in which you take existing stuff and you think about how to modify it, or you layer something on top and say like, it becomes almost like a greenwashing exercise. And I think more and more we'll see authentic exercises happening, but this felt like it was being thought about at a level that was much deeper, from the early conception of how the product was made all the way through how it would be refurbished and reused. The programs that you're asking about, the exchange and the buyback, it wasn't that they weren't conceived of, but they were sort of nascent, and we together developed, this is the way we're going to bring this to life. I think that's one of the areas that I've, been a big part of contributing towards, sort of what's the underlying customer experience in the ways in which that you can, not only have the product be special, but really deliver a better furniture buying and shopping experience for the customer. Like, so I don't think I'm answering your question directly, Ben, but for me, it was tangible. It was about bringing my daughter down to the workshop and showing her like, hey, these things are being made right here. This is what's special about them. I want you to see this. This is what we're trying to build. And this is why it's important. Because right now there's just an extraordinary amount of waste happening. When you start talking about, billions of tons of waste per year with people throwing things away. And every time you drive your bicycle down the street, seeing furniture on the side of the road or in front of a house that's just being tossed out after a handful of years of use, you realize that there's a better way. And being a part of that was something that I was really drawn to.
Well, this product's unique. I would encourage anybody listening, if you're not driving, of course, go to fyrn.com and have a look. I have questions just based on looking at the website, Dave. Like, when you're selling a bar stool for $750, it can't be easy to go get your first customer, right? There's story is wonderful. Certainly some of the stuff that's patented on here is really cool. But how did you even get out and get customers? How did you find product market fit for a $750 stool?
Yeah. So I think that it's a good question. And I think it really depends on sort of a couple of things. So we looked at one of the things that initially when thinking about this, Ross conceived of this system as a better way to, create a home furniture experience. And there's over 60 products that the hardware is designed to facilitate. Seating is where we started because the engineering is the hardest. And, that's where he started because the engineering is the hardest. And if you could do that, then some of these other products sort of fall out easily. we thought about the fact that one, we were totally bootstrapped. We didn't have a huge budget, and a manufacturing business in San Francisco without raising building a manufacturing business without raising capital is quite challenging. So, we thought about what it would take to start to build this business. And one of the things that I thought was really important was, how do we build credibility from the people who are making decisions most frequently in places that have the most visibility in the world when it comes to great design and great experiences that people intersect with. And what that meant was architects and designers who are frequently specifying furniture for high profile projects would sort of create an organic and natural path towards exposure and awareness for our product, and create opportunities for it to be on display, both to the individual and through press and promotion. And so we didn't go, and we basically, if you go to our website now, it's not built for a home purchase experience. The new website will be up in a couple of weeks, and I can't wait, because it is designed around a consumer having a much better experience and learning about the product and shopping in a way that you can see finishes change. That makes sense. What we did is we went and we started to build relationships with some of the best architecture firms in the world who were building the office spaces, the technology office spaces in the Bay Area. We went to the restaurant world, and we thought that both we could prove the efficacy of the durability of the product by putting it in commercial spaces where it would be abused in a way that you would never abuse it in the home. And we would also be putting, if you think about a restaurant, every night it turns 3 times, and that means 100 people just sat in your chair during this entire experience. And you would be shocked at the number of those people who turn the chair over and call us and say, wow, I sat in your chair at Bayota last night and I loved it and I want one for my home. Or I was on break at Slack and I was in the cafe and the furniture's beautiful. I want those for my home. And the interior designer who just finished the project at AutoCamp, if you're from the West Coast, you might know about that project, is like, I want to put this furniture in my own home. And we started to see that not only were the people who were intersecting with the furniture in these environments, but the actual people who were specifying it, these architects and designers, were purchasing it for their offices and for their own homes and for their galleries. And so we took that approach to building the credibility of the product and putting it in environments where folks would find it naturally.
I love to hear that hustle though, Dave. Talk me through that original hustle. Like where the first few sales come from, right? Like the idea of getting it in Slack's offices sounds incredible. But how do you pull that off, man? Talk me through the first few, places you were able to convince to get these in their restaurant, in their offices.
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting it, Ben. It was literally a lot of pounding the pavement and just good old fashioned cold calling for sale, right? Like, if you think about these companies, they're interested in, I thought about, okay, well, how do we access these folks? And, depending on whether you're talking about interior designers or architects or restaurant owners, there's lots of different ways, but there was no path that I particularly wasn't willing to go down, whether it be, carrying furniture through the rain to the office of one of these companies to get in, to have a meeting with the librarian, to try to pitch for us to be able to have a meeting with the design studio. Ross and I would go to New York. We went to we'd go to ICFF, which was the International Contemporary Furniture Fair, and we'd have a small booth. And the next year, the booth was twice the size, and that's an opportunity to meet. And the next year, you double it up again, and it was an opportunity to meet large volumes of architects and designers at one time. And when we were in New York, you'd schedule the 12 meetings that you'd shoot from the top, at the most prestigious firms, and you'd look at the boutique firms that were doing the most high profile projects, and I would just pound the phones and the emails until I could get on someone's radar. And the thing that made all of that easy at the end of the day, Ben, was that the product was beautiful and incredibly impressive in person. So if you look at our furniture and you like it in a photograph, when someone puts their hands on it, they like it 10 times more. And we even ran into folks who, would say, I didn't think this product, frankly, was viable because I didn't see how you could have wood as light and sleek as that, have a strong connection. these are folks who are in a lot of the architect world. They're also product designers, and we put the product in front of them and their minds would be gone. And so having a great product just makes everything else easy. You can be a lot more successful selling a great product with limited resources than you can, shining a turd, for lack of a better saying.
No, that's something I say often too. Right? I don't even like helping people consulting wise if they don't have a good product, because you can't put lipstick on a pig, right? It's easy to be terrible at marketing and have a great product and eventually start rolling, and it's hard to have a shitty product and be the best marketer in the world.
I should say one more thing, which is there's a number of folks, both through network and just Bay Area love of folks who they just took a shot on us, so early on, it was about putting prototypes in a restaurant that was opening, friends of Ross's, Shakewell in Oakland were like, let's put them in and you can learn from the products in the environment. And then, Charles Fan, who is the restaurateur with Slanted Door here in San Francisco and now has restaurants in many cities. He grew up here, like he wanted to support a mission-based company, and he put us in, and now we're in multiple restaurants of his. Melissa Perello, another chef, and these are James Beard and Michelin star winning chefs who loved what we were doing. They loved that it was close. When you think about the care that goes into some of the best food in the world, they care about that being in their ceramics and they care about that being in their seating. And so having people take a shot on you and then that being the credibility you can stand on to when you go to the next spot to say, look, this is how these look in this space. And this is why they're coming back for a second time, because an incredible amount of work goes into maintaining bad furniture in restaurants. And so if you have a product that doesn't require that, or that can be easily serviced, it matters a lot to those folks. So I just want to put that out there.
Well, you have some big names on your trade program page, as far as like having your furniture in Google and Dropbox, Discord, Adobe, Twitch. That's pretty incredible, man.
Thanks, man. And I just want to circle back. I know we might be running short on time, but you asked an important question, which is, how do we think about a person, an individual buying a stool at $750? And I would just say a couple things there, which is, on the surface, that feels like a lot. And I think it depends on where you're coming from. If you are comparing that to an IKEA stool, well, then you're probably not our customer. And I don't mean that because you're not willing to spend more on the furniture. But when you compare it to furniture, if you go into a room and board, or if you go into a DWR, there's chairs and stools that start at 500 and that go up to 2,000 or more. When we look at the furniture next to the chairs that are 2,000 or more, time and time again, we have folks talk about the fact that we should actually raise our prices, and we don't have a desire to do that. We want to keep it at a place that seems reasonable, given that we're manufacturing this product here in the United States and we're trying to source quality materials. But I think that it goes beyond just whether or not the price on the surface is right. When you think about what your costs are associated with buying something that you throw away every 3 or 5 years and then have to go back to the store and buy a new one, the environmental cost of doing that, the fact that that ultimately both the time, the energy, and the dollars go into repeating that process over and over again. I think the cost of investing in something of quality is in a little bit of a different, comes from a little bit of a different perspective when you think about the sort of long run. And then when I think about Fyrn in particular, when you know that if you use this product for 10 years and decide you want to go a different direction from a stylistic perspective, or because you just, you're making a move and you can't take those chairs with you, to know that we'll buy that furniture back and that it's going to retain value, is in my mind, the difference between sort of short term, how do I solve my problem for $50 and I'll do it again, versus long term, I'm investing in something that I know will last and that will ultimately give me a return on that investment if I ever decide I want to go a different direction. To me, that's the economic side of it and the sort of, the difference between, I guess, cost and value. But there's also the value that's derived through having things that bring you joy and using them every day and improving the sort of way that your space feels. And I think that the folks that we hear from, the customers who do invest in that stuff, it's just unbelievable, the stories that we get back about, I've been looking for stools for a decade and this has changed my life. I want the chairs now, and it's like, I can't wait to have more products to bring to those folks. but I acknowledge that that investment is one that most people aren't either willing to make or can't make. And, in time, I hope that we can be offering that same level of quality to a much broader audience through additional lines and through bringing costs down.
Well, I love that I can hear you pounding on the table in the middle of that rant. Like there's obviously passion there, and that's huge for a business. I have a million questions about Fyrn, but I also want to talk about some other fun things, right? So again, that wonderful research you guys paid for on you, which is hilarious, said something like you're an investor in on fannies. Where else are you throwing your money behind that causes that you like? And then I would love to get into a little bit of nifty talk before we're done.
Yeah. So I guess I've made a handful of investments. Aunt Fanny's is a company that I've been involved in. It's out of Portland. The founder is a guy named Matt Franken. It was centered around him solving a problem for his family and his kids where, they were finding that they were having negative immune response to the products that they were using in their home. And over time, he discovered that that was the source of a lot of the problems that their kids were having. And he solved that by creating a sort of set of non-toxic cleaning and home products. And the company is, I think, doing some really cool things. All of the products are food grade ingredients, safe for kids, safe for pets. And, we just don't totally understand the toxicity of a lot of the products that are out there that are appearing like they're safe and natural, but aren't truly that. And so, I actually went to school with the founder. We had sort of gone our separate ways for a lot of years. And then when he was building this company, I made an angel investment, and he later came to me. He caught me at the right moment when I was between Alvarez and Marsal and Fyrn, and asked me to be a part of the board and an advisor to him. And so I've been involved in that capacity and continue to be. I've also recently invested in a company called Inspo, which is about sort of creating design inspiration for folks. It comes out of a project called Haiku Jam, where sort of aggregating haikus from people across the world that imbue emotion and on any topic, and then aggregating both visual and audio and content that sort of helps in your design experience. As part of the Investor 9, we invested in Dibs, and I think that honestly, I don't think that's something that I ever would have been involved in were it not for that Wednesday night poker turned Shark Tank evening that we were doing weekly. And it's been a nice resurgence of just sort of like these childhood things. I hadn't looked at a trading card in 30 years. And to sort of have the excitement that, that you or TC had for these things, and then have that lead to thinking about the transition from cardboard, to a world in which these things are then traded fractionally and continuously online was just mind bending, and sort of opened my eyes to where we are potentially going. And I've thought a lot about that in the art world, but I think as we thought about it in terms of a new market as an alternative investment and what the elimination of friction could do for that industry, it was super exciting. So meeting Evan and being able to invest in Dibs was awesome. And now to see the energy that's building around that is truly exciting. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I do it directly with companies, and sometimes it's looking at somebody like Austin Reed from Morning Brew, who's got a rolling fund and is going to be able to invest in things that I'm not going to see or get access to, and so investing in that is a way to be a part of some of the new things that are around a corner and something I'm not even seeing. So there's some examples of places where I've been able to sort of quote unquote angel invest.
Yeah, the On Fannies thing is cool. We definitely subscribe to a lot of what they believe here, and just this podcast might have led to a new customer in my wife. So awesome. That's cool. And then, look, I wanted to transition to Dibs and to NFT. So this is going to come out literally tonight as we're recording this, the 23rd of February. Dibs is on the App Store. You've heard me talk about it on the podcast before. If you want to get into fractionalized ownership of sports cards and you have an Apple device, I don't think it's on Android yet. Maybe I'm wrong here, Dave. Go download the app, get in the wait list. Maybe might be able to get you in there early. No promises. So DM me if that's something you're really into and you want to check this out. Might be able to help you jump the wait list. Otherwise, I'm assuming it'll be open to the public here very soon. Kind of cool to get in a group like that. And I wouldn't have been exposed to this opportunity to invest in this. Certainly I've been in sports cards, but coming from the outside, from somebody who hasn't collected in 30 years, was that like shell shocking to jump right back into the way it is now? Because it's definitely a different scene. And then at the same point, like shift into transitioning into investing into dibs.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this, and, I think in some ways I just love to see energy around almost anything that's happening. And, there was clearly an energy that was happening in collectibles. And I think that there's a confluence of factors that ignited that, right? When the pandemic struck, people's attention, was suddenly people didn't have a place to put their attention. It went into these places that were accessible from your home. And, we saw all sorts of amateur investors, spark up and, and those markets go crazy. And I don't think that the amateur investors fueled the stock market necessarily. I do think it was a component, but we saw energy go into that, and sports were not available, and you couldn't go out to a concert, or you couldn't go out to a bar. And so, suddenly collectibles became incredibly interesting as a place to put attention. And I just think like markets are fascinating. And so watching the way that energy can go into a market, explode the perceived or actual value of something, and then find sort of a balance. Seeing how that happens is really, really fascinating to me. And so this was one more place. I spent a ton of time on stock market investing, and as a way to both learn about industries and companies that I would have otherwise never seen. This was like one more of those opportunities when I saw the early folks who were creating new asset classes and making them accessible to people. Things like Rally Road's an example, Otis, suddenly Masterworks, like suddenly it's not just very, very wealthy folks who have access to a car or an incredibly expensive collectible or a masterwork of art. Fractionalizing brings access that reduces friction. When I think about dibs, and you then take one more layer of friction away, which is waiting for an opportunity to be able to sell that fraction, but being able to do it continuously, suddenly it becomes a very, very interesting way to take cultural relevance. A lot of people love sports. They would love an opportunity to invest in LeBron James' success, but they aren't going to get into the place where they understand the entire trading card world. They're going to acquire a card on eBay. They're going to get it graded. They're going to figure out, how to sell it. They're going to deal with transaction fees. It's just too complicated, and there's too much friction there. But when it's as simple as downloading an app and, hitting a Apple Pay connection and then being like, cool, I'll take $100 of LeBron and seeing him win a championship and seeing that be worth $250 and then selling it. Now you're talking about sort of an interesting way for people to engage in what becomes kind of like a game, right? I think we're seeing gamification across all sorts of aspects of life. And I love certain things about that. And I find other parts about it to be really distracting from what is most important day to day. And trying to find a balance in that is hard, frankly.
Elaborate on that. Like, I like the gamification of dibs, right? Like, people oftentimes are playing fantasy football. I know I do, or fantasy other sports, and then it became one day fantasy, right? Where you're essentially, I think this guy's going to have a great game today. This takes it even a step farther, where you can buy essentially shares of a player in real time, and buy low and sell high. If they go off for 50 points in a game, you can sell on the backside of that and grab on the low end. But you're talking about gamification possibly being bad. Are you talking more like social media, or where are you going with that thought?
I think what I'm saying is that in one part of my life, I love the tangible aspect of of being connected to the things that were, like, for example, going back to Fyrn, like, I love that you can know who's made your chair and the story behind that, and that I'm seeing that happen right in front of my eyes, of something that I love that's quality. When I think about the digitalization of everything, which is what I think we're seeing with NFTs and the transition from a physical thing. Like one of the joys of opening that pack when I was a kid was just that. And you're getting the replication of that online. But as you sort of take the tangible away, there's a little part of me that feels like remorse for that and just sort of I see a path that we are headed towards that feels almost inevitable to me. And I feel like I'm not debating the merits of whether it's good or bad. I just feel like there's some conflict on a personal level as to whether that's the world that I'd be excited to live in. Not because I don't think it creates amazing amounts of value or makes things accessible to huge numbers of people across the world, or creates new experiences that are exciting. But I think like the old man in me maybe reminisces for ways that, that feel romanticized based on my past experience and the way that I thought about like, oh, I want to show that to my kids, or, and I don't even mean in sports cars. I mean, maybe it's why I have a record player at home, and I still sort of, even though I can stream music, I like to pull that record out off the shelf and look at it and talk about it. The other side of that coin is that I am ecstatic about the opportunity to learn from my daughter, because she's going to be digitally native and she's going to understand how to navigate things in a way that I can't even really fathom. Like as I mentioned to you earlier, I used to be in many ways the last person to dive into a new way to interact or technology. I'm trying to actually push myself to engage more in that, and I find that exciting. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just a little more about that conflict, I guess.
Yeah, it actually makes me raise another question, right? So I wanted to talk about NFTs, and I know we have about 10 minutes left, but like you literally are one of the most excited people I've seen in the NFT market at the moment. While also at the same time contradicting yourself with what you just said of like, I'd rather play my record. Like you sound like an old man in one fashion, and then, the other hand is very excited about it. And it's clearly where we're going, right? To your point, I referenced it in poker. I think you referenced it too. Like Ready Player One, the movie, the book, that's the future. No question, that's the future. And so, do you want to be one of those people that lives in the past, or do you want to continue learning about the future? I personally, at 36, I want to continue getting sharper with my skills of where the world's going. But like, so explain to me how you are like so almost negative in one fashion, right? Like you want to pull that record off your shelf and you don't know whether that's the world you want to exist in. And then so like excited about NFTs, which we can describe as well for anybody listening who doesn't know what that is. How does that happen? How is there such a dichotomy? Is that the word there?
Yeah. So I think one of the places that I can't help but be fascinated by the sort of, the evolution of commerce or the things that draw people's attention and energy. And I just think that this is one of those things that's like, it's going to just be an ever expanding magnet for it. And so I'm curious to learn as much as I can about it and to think about what those applications are. I tend to believe that I use business as a lens for a lot of the way I understand things. And, that has advantages and disadvantages, but I tend to believe that at least in the United States, where capitalism is revered and accumulation seems to be such a driver. And I don't always believe that's the best way, but I do acknowledge it's how it is. I tend to believe that the world will find the path to the least friction and the ability to sort of monetize most easily. And, the internet brought an element of that. It brought access to a much larger audience. It brought connectivity. It brought the ability to instantaneously market to somebody and to do it in different ways. I think we're seeing that's a foundation. I think we're now seeing, the second and third order layers get placed on top of that foundation. One of the things that excites me are where we can build these bridges that create opportunities for segments who have potentially not benefited from their own work or from their own opportunities to benefit. And so I'll give you an example. My wife's an artist. She's an amazing artist who is, very successful by all measures. She has work at museums across the country. She's got a show up right now at the SF MoMA. And I have a lot of conversations with the people in her community about art and the infrastructure of the gallery system and the museum system. An artist sells a painting or a photograph, and in most cases, not in all cases, that's the last time that they see a residual for that sale is at the point of sale. And it sells many times over and often at a much, much higher price. If you think about works that are centuries and decades old, like, and the most famous artists, every time a painting sells for millions of dollars, there's not a piece that goes back to the artist. The blockchain makes it possible that you could have a smart contract attached to a work of art whereby 1% could go to the artist every time it changes hands into perpetuity. And if you take that a step further, and I think that it's actually going to become quite interesting to see, I see all sorts of examples where people are trying to work outside of the existing system for creating digital art and how it's going to be distributed and what the opportunities will be. Where I think it becomes very interesting to me is how do you take some of the functionality of these new technologies and opportunities and apply it to the existing system so that you can change the dynamics for the parties involved and actually create a better system. And to me, it feels like, okay, I like the concept of a residual going back to an artist every time a work is sold. I also like the concept that if I love an artist, contemporary or otherwise, I can buy a fraction of a work. But what I don't like about that is, wait, I don't get to put that work on my wall. So, if you were to think about the existing system, and I don't know how much you know about this, Ben, but galleries represent artists. Artists are selling their work through those galleries. Institutions are buying that work in many cases and displaying it. I could see a system where someone puts a network in place where any work of art that's for sale, an individual doesn't want to buy in whole, can be bought fractionalized to a lot of individuals and then displayed publicly so anyone can always see it at existing museum institutions, right? Rally Road does this with a gallery in New York, but I think you could leverage the existing institutions and now more work is in the public sphere for everyone to access. Some of the most beautiful artwork in the world sits in containers in storage so that you don't have a taxable event for the people who trade that art at the highest classes. And I think that's a shame. So if we could have more art on display for more people in a public way, while also creating an investment vehicle that was accessible to more people who weren't just the richest folks in the world because it's fractionalized, and artists could receive a residual at every transaction, now you've made an existing system substantially better for many of the parties involved. And I love that.
I mean, that's the premise behind the art side of the NFT, right? That, if I buy a piece of art, that's the last time from an artist, that's the last time the artist gets paid. And now they're going to get paid potentially in perpetuity. But that didn't explain why you're running away from it either, right? Like you just said, I don't know if that's the world I want to live in. Explain that a little more. Help me understand, as someone, again, I've seen you the last week or so, crazy mania about NFTs, that is the future, right? This digital world we're all going to live in the next 20, 30 years. What makes you not want to be there?
Yeah, I think that it's inevitable on some level that virtual realities will become a larger and larger portion of the realities that a lot of people, not all people, will be living in. And I like aspects of that. And I find other aspects to be terrifying, right? Like spending a huge amount of time with a device on my head, and entering a place I'm not physically engaged in feels strange to me just because my whole life has not been spent that way. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be better or more interesting. I love the notion that, that the physical form that we were given versus the one that we could choose, could become an interesting conversation point. I love the ability for, going back to the art analogy, the idea that I could take a piece of visual art and put it in a digital space that I enter, and the display could be something that you couldn't possibly recreate in the tangible world, that could have an audio component. Some of the opportunities are just extraordinary. I just think that, getting my head wrapped around whether that is how I want to spend my time, I haven't come to terms with how much I'm comfortable with that yet. And whether, I want to spend more time in nature. I want to take more hikes with my kids. I want to be more connected and grounded to the planet and the way that we're all interconnected. And I don't know how to reconcile whether that new world, if you want to call it the metaverse, or even the one that we're working on now on the internet, I know in some ways it's absolutely accomplishing that. And in others, I feel like it's potentially separating us even more from sort of getting out and having an experience in person, in the real world, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting, right? The moment you can, to wrap this back to the beginning, the moment you can throw on your VR headset and your headphones and be fully immersed in the food carts in Chiang Mai, Thailand, while you're sitting in your apartment in San Francisco? Like, is that going to change things? Is that going to let you tour the world and experience it? I don't want to say firsthand, but like, I think we're at such an infancy of the internet and what's going to happen in the digital world and where we're all going to spend time. And at the same point, I agree with you. Like, and I want to spend time in nature. I want to be connected to people in the real world. And I wonder if, is that the same exact thing as, my friend saying, I can't believe my kids sit and stare at a screen all day. When I was a kid, I used to play out in the backyard. Like, is that just me? Is that me saying that same exact thing? Or you saying it right now? Or are we going to have to find some harmonious balance of the digital world and the real world that's going to work for everyone?
I think that ultimately different segments of us will find that faster or slower. Some won't engage, some will. I'm excited about seeing how it evolves, and I want to tune into it instead of ignoring it, because I think going back to, as an example, in the last couple of years, as I've sort of engaged more with Twitter, I've met people that have taught me an incredible amount. I've learned from folks who I have met and from folks that I haven't met. And I've gotten access to circles of folks that I otherwise would never have been exposed to. Had I done that 10 years ago, rather than sort of, talked about it in a way where I was dismissive and not really ever given it a shot, I might have found lots of opportunities that I otherwise didn't, or met incredible people. It's an area of my life that I wasn't sort of treating as a yes that creates opportunity, and it was a no. And I don't want to be that. I want to sort of be open to experiences that might feel uncomfortable but help me grow. That's how I have existed in the physical world, and I want to open that path to the digital world too.
Well, I'm fascinated by NFTs and like just allowing myself to jump into the future and wonder what it's going to be like. I have a feeling Taylor Holliday's going to come join the podcast again. We're recording next week, so I have a feeling we're going to talk a lot about that there. But perhaps we need a few different people on a call just discussing the possibilities, because I don't know, that makes me feel like a kid again when we start talking about where this all might end up.
Yeah, I'm down for that. That would be fun.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Dave. I know you're a lurker. I know you don't want anybody finding you, but if anybody wanted to connect with you, Dave, where would be the best place?
Yeah, you can reach me, David Fyrn, on email. You can reach me on Twitter at Mad Roman Candle. Most of the social platforms, that's my handle. And come check out. Come check me out. I guess maybe I'll be contributing in a more substantial way going forward, as opposed to lurking. I hope.
I hope you too. Look, I get told the same thing. I tweet a little bit, but I don't tweet a lot about business or any of the stuff that I'm involved in, and I don't know why I don't either. So maybe we should have that conversation sometime too. Of like, I would like to hear everything that you have to say, and I think you have a lot to say, especially with just anything that's going on in the world. You typically have a viewpoint that I appreciate, and if I can ever push you in the right direction to produce more and put out more content, I know I would.
Dude, I mean, it means a lot to me, and I really appreciate you saying it. I thank you for taking some time to talk to me today. I still need to learn more about your story, and I look forward to that. I hope we get a chance to keep diving deeper. And just want to say thanks, Ben. It's been fun, man.
Really appreciate Dave coming on the show. That dude is so smart. I honestly didn't know the right questions to ask him today to like bring out even more of his brilliance. I've learned so much from Dave. He's one of those people on Wednesday nights that when he starts talking, we all kind of just shut up and listen. He's super smart, and I'm just really glad he could come on the show. You know the drill. Go follow him on Twitter at Mad Roman Candle. Go check out Fyrn. I'll put both of those links in the show notes. I would love a follow on Twitter as well. Shameless plug. And then while you're at it, if you're on your iPhone right now and you're listening to the podcast, take 10 seconds to go leave a review. It really, really does help expand the reach of the show, and I appreciate it very much. And then while you're at it, go to the App Store and download Dibs and trade some sports cards. That'd be awesome as well. So thanks, everyone, for listening, and I'll see all of you next Wednesday.